Hey, John.
Hello, Jeff.
Michelle
I'm
and I are incredibly grateful for you coming on our show. A bit of backstory: I found you, or we were searching through hats, and specifically cowboy hats. And if you Google the cowboy hat, lo and behold, there you are. And you made a film, and I actually watched the film twice. And this is my compliment. It was like Stetson, perhaps made a baby with the Coens, and it would look a lot like your movie.
Is the cowboy hat as an icon even still alive? Or did it die with the Western, John Wayne, and the demolition of the original Stetson factory? Or is the cowboy hat bigger, better than ever? Well, follow me, because that's what I aim to find out.
It's an incredible film for anyone who is interested in the culture of this country. Certainly, the specific nature of the cowboy hat, but in a much broader way, it speaks to what it is to live in to this American culture, coming from a Canadian.
Yeah.
So,
I praise indeed.
What is a boot?
so let's, we're going to talk about the movie a lot, but what I wanted to do now is maybe go back and just how did hats enter your world as a young person? Was there something significant that took place? Was there a hat or a series of hats? You were a baseball player, or you were a little cowboy and Indian. I think I can say Indian. Back in the day when kids played cowboy and Indians, now I guess it's cowboy and Native Americans, First Peoples Nation. I don't know, but when you were younger, how did a hat play into your world, and was there a specific one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks, John B. Stetson and the Coen brothers. Joel and Ethan Coen are two particular heroes of mine, so that's high praise. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Indeed. Hats were always kind of a big part of my life growing up. I'm sure I had, I don't know, at least probably two or three of those cardboard cowboy hats that you got as kind of a Western outfit that you had to wear. At least when I grew up in the 60s and 70s as a young person, you had to have a cowboy outfit that you would wear to church, to school, to any social event that you possibly could. But yeah, I think I sort of thought about this, and my first real significant attachment was to a Minnesota Vikings hat, just a baseball cap, that the two-tone. Bright yellow brim and purple for the purple people eaters of the Minnesota Vikings in the 70s, and the Fran Tarkenton and Alan Page era. My dad brought it back after a business trip to Minnesota, and I don't know how long I wore that hat specifically, but it was the better part of at least a decade. And as we all know, a baseball cap is not quite as durable as a cowboy hat. And it got to the point of being a little bit of a joke, both amongst my peers and my significant others. This was in my high school. This is probably from middle school through most of high school. And I kept that hat for a long, long time. And I had it, and it was so filthy and deteriorated that at some point it just disappeared. And I think my significant other, my now wife, and long-term wife, I think relieved me of that particular hat. But I had a really profound and personal attachment to the hat that it sort of carries over to my current collection, and that passion has just sort of continued to this very day. I do feel a real significant attachment to the hats that I love.
Did she cop to it?
It continues.
Did she cop to throwing it out?
She's never copped to it. I think she knows.
Trying to like rustle up some stuff, like
Yeah, I think she knows it would be a thing. So she's never admitted to it, but I think I know who the culprit is.
So what you're saying is, without words, you're thanking her.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. Right along.
Not the words in your mouth, John.
I
think I made it known that if any of these are just a few, but I think I made it known pretty clearly that if any of these things disappear ever, that it's a problem. So one hopefully one and done on that front.
Yeah. It went out with the wagon wheel coffee table. Um, okay, so
Right.
so at some point the cowboy hat entered your world. For me, I talk about being cowboy adjacent. I'm not a cowboy, but John Travolta was. He's probably
Right.
not a cowboy either, but he was an urban cowboy, and that was sort of the cowboy hat came into my world because of that film. Because I really can't remember. I really can't remember. In Canada, we needed stuff to cover our ears. A little cold up there, so I don't remember wearing a cowboy hat until then, and I'm
Yes.
pretty sure it was a Stetson. And like you, you might be still married. 3 marriages ago, I'm not sure where that hat is now, but I'm pretty sure. Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Somehow this is attached. I don't know.
so so
Let me
that
wrangle y'all back in.
Yeah.
and actually Michelle's from Texas and she doesn't own a cowboy hat. We'll get into that later. So that's how I got my first cowboy hat.
Wow.
How did the cowboy hat enter your
Yeah.
world? And that's got to be leading to the movie you made. But do you remember that moment where
Yeah.
other than being a little kid, with the cardboard ones, do you remember your first full on cowboy hat?
I do. Yeah. We were fans of the rodeo in our household, and even though I grew up in Mississippi, which is obviously not really cowboy country per se, although there was a lot of cattle and we were around all that. My grandparents were farmers and cattle people and around all of that growing up, horses and everything else, but not particular cowboys. But we were big fans of the rodeo, and because of Urban Cowboy, quite frankly, rodeo became a bigger part of almost everybody's life of that era. I was very very much influenced by Urban Cowboy in terms of what Travolta did for the cowboy hat and then the rest of the accessories and
Smell the
mechanical bull.
bromance.
Right. Yeah, and Deborah Winger too. She counts. Yeah, she probably had a bigger influence, quite personally, on me. I don't know about you, Jeff. Maybe Deborah Winger actually did it for me more than Travolta did. But yeah,
Yeah, I'm a Deborah Winger,
we went to a lot of
but if
regional.
I was a John Travolta, that would be okay too.
Yeah, yeah. We went to a lot of regional rodeos. There's a big rodeo in Jackson, Mississippi, that we would go to every year. And then when I was a kid, we went to Yellowstone. It was this is pre-driver's license, so I had to be 12, 13, somewhere in that age range. And we went to the rodeo in Cody, Wyoming, and that had a profound influence on my life. Cody has it's still to this day, and I try to go every year when I can. I don't make it every single year, but Cody has a Friday and Saturday night rodeo every year in town, and I happened to catch it going through there on the way to Yellowstone when I was a kid. So those things had a huge influence in terms of getting my first ones, and they weren't. I don't think I could afford a Stetson. There were probably some off-brand kind of hat code, non-licensed, 10 15 $20 hat. But my dad did. My dad, my head. It was always an excuse. You guys might have heard this growing up. It's like your head's still growing. We'll get you a nice hat when your head stops growing. So my dad got a beautiful, big silver belly Stetson that's still in a hat box at my mom's house,
Wow.
and that one's still around. So he got the nice hat, and I think I probably went through a couple of straw hats when I was a kid that were probably, came down to about here. I could probably just, tilt them up and see, but those were my first hats. And I wouldn't wear them like my Vikings hat. It was a little taboo in my neck of the woods, probably to show up at school in a cowboy hat. But yeah, we had, and where I grew up, we had regional rodeos. Mississippi State had a rodeo arena, so yeah, we were out, and all the vendors, you got those things, and then the biggest thing, I probably spent $10 or $15 on a hat, but I probably spent $50 the first time I could getting one of those big old feather hat bands that were huge,
Nice.
and part of that era. They weren't leather hat bands then. For some reason, we got into this big thing, and I can remember Roy Clark and several people of that ilk and Nashville stars wearing these gigantic feather.
Please tell me you have a picture that you can share.
I don't. I really do. I wish there's probably some Polaroid or some negative that's probably crammed in one of my mom's end tables that
I'll
probably
talk to
has some
mama.
documentation of it, but I can't. I couldn't for the life of me find it. But those memories are indelible. I can still remember very distinctly those wild colors and high crowns and wide brims of the urban cowboy era, and that really obviously you know it's we tied into it in the film that really rekindled Hollywood. The Western was dead for the most part in Hollywood,
Yeah,
uh,
so let's take a
or at
trip
least was
back.
on life's pretty serious license
So at some point you
until
decided
Urban Cowboy kind of kicked it off.
to become a director, and I'm pretty sure this can't
Yep.
have been your first movie. So take us through the trajectory of your directing, and then how you got to this movie. So as a young man, did you want to direct? What was your directing story?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. So I was obviously a lover of film and television. I consumed a lot of those products. I was obviously influenced by classic westerns, and watched all of that. Pretty nonstop growing up. Just any old film, if it had a plot, I would sit down and watch it on Saturday mornings, mostly in my town. We got reruns of classic movies on Saturday mornings out of Memphis, Tennessee, and so I watched most of that stuff on television on a Saturday morning with lots of commercial breaks. But it had a big influence, and yeah, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do. I started doing audio visual stuff when I was like 12, 13 years old,
Wow,
mixing the
wow.
radio broadcast for my church, doing weddings. That it sort of led into more and more experience with video, doing some corporate gigs and things like that when I was like 14, 15 years old, even getting a job in my hometown doing video and audio editing. And then knew I kind of wanted to do the film thing, so I pursued that through film school, and then started doing a lot of advertising. Quite frankly, that was sort of the quickest path into getting your hands on a camera and having a budget and lighting and learning the crafts. And so in my early career, did a lot of commercials, and then started getting into television and largely sports television in sort of the middle part of my career. That culminated in me doing a lot of big events like the Tour de France. I sort of produced the Tour de France all during the Lance Armstrong years. Dakar Rally, a lot of off-piste sport, 3 Olympics I worked at. So not the traditional route to film, but when I relaunched my company after leaving a network job, one of the first things we looked at was like, what do you want to do now? What can we do? And one of the first projects that really came up was this film.
Really,
I had
really.
met,
Oh, that's
yeah, I
interesting.
had I had met a custom hat maker named Rich Rand out of Billings, Montana, while I was doing a feature for another show, for another story. And I was just his craft and sort of the lure and the fact that he had been doing this since the 1970s really just sort of captured my attention and my imagination. And I just decided, okay, we're going to spend a couple of years here and we're going to dig into this. Nobody has told a comprehensive documentary film version of the story of the cowboy hat. It sort of is great from a factual standpoint because it allowed us to delve into some of the things that we kind of know cursorily, which is that John B. Stetson more or less invented the cowboy hat by taking a look at some examples when he went west to try to escape uh, diagnosis of tuberculosis, basically a death sentence diagnosis of tuberculosis. So he went west to Colorado and basically met some vaqueros and some people along the way that had wide brim hats, and he came from a hat making family. That's obviously a fascinating story in and of itself. But to be honest with you, I'm reluctant. I'll acknowledge this to you guys. I'll really acknowledge this to everybody. It was really an excuse to dive into films. Again, this is really just an excuse to look at westerns, the influence of westerns, the style of directors and actors, and what they did with wardrobe and hats to tell really compelling stories. And so, the Cowboy Hat movie is this sort of in the guise of factual historical, context of sort of telling the tale of the cowboy hat and how it's sort of had a life of that's lasted for well over a century. It was really just an excuse to watch a lot of old movies and just talk about them.
Did it take on that note, John, did it take a life of its own as you were making the
Of
movie
course,
and
yeah. I think Jeff will verify this. All projects sort of start with a vision of we're going to do this. In film is a collaborative method, so I have these wonderful collaborators, and mostly my producing partner Olivia Olson. I looked at it and I said, okay, this is what we're doing, and of course, every step of the way, you change that direction based on what you discover and the stories that you uncover, and you sort of swing it in a different way. So the original vision of a pretty sort of factual kind of linear story of this Philadelphian who invented the cowboy hat turned into really more or less a pretty epic journey for both me personally and I think the film conversely of really just all these different layers that there are sort of associated with the cowboy hat, and it's multi-layered. It's deep to the point where it really surprised me once you get into it how rich that story is, and it took us a lot of down a lot of different paths.
John, what was your biggest surprise in the making of it?
Um, I guess my biggest surprise was the ownership. I guess there's a couple of different things, but probably the biggest surprise overall was this kind of quest. What I didn't know, and this is a great Hollywood story. There was a fair amount of controversy around who designed and built the Gus hat for Lonesome Dove, and this is a big component of the film. So the idea is sort of this quest for what the ultimate hat was. So we looked at early hats and Tom Mix's hats and all these different sort of milestones in the evolution of the cowboy hat. And one of the things I think that surprised me the most is this kind of sort of debate over where the Gus hat came from, because Hollywood is not very good at documenting little things like a cowboy hat. Like it came from a wardrobe supply company, but nobody really knew the origin and how it sort of weaved its way through the process and became what Robert Duvall wore. And we talk about Travolta and Urban Cowboy. Lonesome Dove was another huge milestone in the evolution of and sort of re-establishment of the cowboy hat as an iconic thing. And that was even conceptually, it was probably a little bit bigger in terms of lasting impact, because obviously Urban Cowboy was a little bit more rooted in its time and place, and it was Urban Cowboy, not the story of a cowboy like High Noon or any other classic Western Shane or any of that stuff. So yeah, to me it was surprising to say that you couldn't really find the origin of where that thing, who designed it, who built it, who did the crown shaping and who did the brim shaping. That was a real journey in and of itself. And we did in the end track it down and figure it all out. But it was, to me, that was surprising that we couldn't just go to the wardrobe person for Lonesome Dove and say, okay, where did you find this piece that became so iconic? We couldn't do that. We really had to just deconstruct it and then reconstruct it like a mystery.
Yeah, it's interesting the filmmakers that have taken it on too, or the actors. Certainly Kevin Costner and Silverado and Dances with Wolves, and now his new Horizon.
And now Horizon
are the Coens that sort of took on the Scruggs story.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And I guess for those of folks who watch this movie, there's a lovely linear thread to it, and the story basically is being told by one individual who we actually never get to meet, but he walks through these different terrains, and his voice is
he was wearing a very
captivating.
similar hat to this hat right here. He was, oddly enough, he was wearing a very similar hat to this one right here. But yes, continue, Jeff. So.
No, it was just
well, I want to know
yeah,
how did you go about picking that voice, because it is, I found myself pulling towards the screen listening to it. It was so captivating.
Yeah.
So what went into picking that voice?
Yeah, I'm going to reveal a little movie magic here, which we don't always like to do. This is a little movie magic kind of
I'm moving
insight
in.
that
Uh-oh.
may shatter the illusion a little bit. But we talked about surprises along the way, so we had a cowboy cast to be that guy going on the journey, to find the ultimate hat. And it was an older guy, and he was fantastic. He had the look and really led the lifestyle. He's a guy that I had stumbled upon, a decade or more ago down in Texas, and he was really, he lived out in the mesquite, and it was really authentic and had the look, but he didn't really have the voice. And so the big reveal here is that it's not that there's those that cowboy and the voice are not the same people. We combine, the best of both worlds a little bit. The cowboy's anonymous in the film. We never really see his face too much, and it sort of became a little bit more of a functional aspect that the cowboy in the movie is actually me. And a lot of times I'm filming myself in a location that I happen to be at to tell this story. So I'm in Hollywood for part of the time. I'm in Colorado. I'm in Texas. I'm all over the place. So we filmed it all over the country.
Living the
Uh,
cowboy life.
right? Yeah, we were going to Texas. We're going to film this. We're going to go film a hat maker down there. We're going to go film this particular story. We're going to go find the Gus hat where it is in the museum down at San Marcos. So all that stuff was occurring, but the real gap was a voice. I didn't want to be my voice. My voice. We looked at people like Sam Elliott. It's like, can we get Sam Elliott to voice this thing? He would be great, but he's really overused now a little bit in terms of commercial work and things like that. So maybe it's not really exactly right. Um, and this sort of segues. So we started doing the music for the film. It still didn't have the voice. It still didn't have the right idea for the voice. And I got into this heavy idea of Texas swing playing a big part of it, and classic Texas swing. The theme song is really of a 1940s kind of era yodeling song, but a lot of the tracks came out of the 1930s and the origins of Texas swing. And when I contacted the guy that runs the catalog for the Light Crust Doughboys, which is the originator, it was Bob Will's original band, his first real band. When I contacted him, this guy came on the phone and he had this voice.
That's the guy?
It just stopped me in my tracks. And this guy's name is Art Greenhaw. He's the bassist for the current iteration of Light Crust Doughboys, which the Light Crust Doughboys have been around for 100 years, almost now. But Art keeps that dream alive, and he's the bassist and vocalist for the band and kind of runs the whole thing. But he had that voice. He had that great voice. And so when I heard Art's voice, I said, that's it. That's the voice. And so after a little bit of cajoling and some manipulation, I got Art to sign up and be the voice of the cowboy.
And I think
And
that
that's the
would
beauty
get you
of,
to do a lot of things.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
beyond the movie. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just fantastic to take you on that journey.
Yeah, and that's really part of the fun and magic of filmmaking, right? Is that you can combine the best of all worlds. I think it's better that we never really see the cowboy, per se. We just hear him talking about this journey that he's going on, and Art was the voice that embodied that whole spirit
Yeah,
of that
we
narration
also
that we needed.
we also never found out what was in the suitcase in Pulp Fiction, you know. So
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we always need a little mystery in film, don't we? I feel a little bad for revealing it for the people that don't know, but it's kind of a fun part of, and that's one of those things we discovered along the way. It's just like, oh, this will be much better if we do it this way versus the way that we originally envisioned it, and having this actual cowboy kind of do the whole thing.
take us through your opinion of Hollywood and how Hollywood has influenced that way back to maybe The Great Escape and John Ford and all the way to Horizon. So take us through that journey that you discovered
Sure.
inside of the lens of Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's really the cowboy ideal is kind of an ideal. It's sort of a conceptual idea, I think. There weren't, in the scheme of things, there weren't really that many cowboys. They certainly didn't have the level of influence that we probably perceived that they had based on just sheer numbers and, the way the cattle business worked. Cattle drives were a very short lived thing historically, but they take such a huge part of our imagination, and they're so iconic to Americans because of Hollywood, quite frankly. And the reason this thing still exists, and these things back over my shoulder and what you guys are wearing still exist in this kind of form, regardless of how utilitarian they were, and what John B. Stetson did from a very practical and even commercial standpoint. The reason they still exist is because of Hollywood. It sort of the first narrative films were westerns. And if you can call the Great Train Robbery the first film, the first narrative film, and legitimately so. But even before that, the first popular kinetoscopes by Tom and Stetson were a Buffalo Bill on the Wild West show, Annie Oakley shooting glass balls, and the dances, the Indian dances, and the cowboys, and all the things that the Buffalo Bill Wild West show embodied. Edison knew enough to film those and commercialize that, and that sort of led into the first, obviously, popular feature films, which were westerns for the most part. But to me, the Western kind of begins and ends with John Ford. To me, the sort of the beginning of the real arty, fully realized conceptual Western genre film was Stagecoach, which combined John Ford and John Wayne. And to me, that was sort of the beginning of that plateau of the art form. And it sort of ended with John Ford and John Wayne with The Searchers. To me, you don't get any better than you do with The Searchers in terms of the art form. Now, there have been great Westerns since, and I think Horizon and that saga
Where does
represents
the spaghetti western and the Clint Eastwood? That was a whole other decade of film that the Cowboy Hat just keeps
yeah.
coming back, and that would have been, I guess, almost at least 15 years later than that.
Oh yeah, easily. Yeah. Basically, The Searchers kind of hits in the 50s, and then the spaghetti westerns start coming around in the late 60s and early 70s. And to me, they're equal. Obviously, Once Upon a Time in the West, and what Sergio Leone did with the spaghetti westerns and Eastwood, Fistful of Dollars, and all the Man with No Name films with Eastwood are at that level of the pinnacle of the art form, and they're of that time and place. And that's what's great about cinema. To really get to the heart of what you're asking, Jeff. I mean, I think cinema reinvents itself every few decades. We had the post golden era of Hollywood in the 1970s, and that sort of culminates again. Urban Cowboy reinvents the Western genre with an urban story, because that's where America went from rural to urban, and it's of its time and place and captured a moment in time. Lonesome Dove kind of rekindled the traditional Western in the miniseries form. And we've seen it, Silverado, all those examples you talked about.
And fast forward to Tarantino, The Hateful Eight. I mean, it it just keeps coming back in so many different forms.
Yeah, just these artists like Tarantino that can reinvent this kind of ensemble Western genre, and update it, introduce a level of artistic violence, if you will, that wasn't available in terms of the palettes for guys like John Ford and the guys that
things got a little different in the 70s,
30s, 40s, and 50s. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wasn't really available to those guys because of the Hays Code and everything else. But yeah, to me, the bottom line is a Western is a genre that will forever, have a place in cinema and television and anything related to the motion pictures, for sure. And it's always good. And it's what inspired me.
Let's spin over to music. I mean, your film is so comprehensive in many ways, and it deals with not only the film world, but what was happening in music with Pharrell and now Beyonce. Can you speak to what was going on in that over the last 30, 40, 50 years? How those, and certainly, country and Western was a big part of it, but then it turned into country, then it turned into country rock, and Garth Brooks is a, superstar, and so here comes the cowboy hat again. So how did music play out in your film?
Yeah, it's just sort of part of the overall culture. I mean, music is hugely important to me, and the soundtrack for my little film, the Cowboy Hat Movie, is pretty chock a block. We did some original scoring, but we mostly went back to classic tracks that sort of embody what we thought was sort of the ideals that sort of could underlie the story throughout. And I think what's
I'm so
really
I have to ask, did
yeah.
you play anything in the movie, musically speaking?
Oh, did I? No, no,
I
no,
feel
no,
like
no.
there's some type of musician within you.
There's a horrible musician that's not really trying that hard to get out of me. Yeah, I know where we talked about limitations of directors, and music is very much number one probably on that list in terms of ability to compose or play or do any of that stuff. But as part of that kind of career path between commercials and sports television, especially, we did a lot of narrative stuff that were sort of driven by music, right? So one of the first things I do in every project is sort of pick and choose what those ideal tracks are, and as part of that evolution and surprises along the way that we talk about, you change all the time and say, "Oh, I found this because of this and that which I thought was going to drive this whole thing, that music track is no longer even relevant. We're going to throw that away and start over with a new piece." But music was so important to this whole thing. It's probably the most labor intensive part of the whole thing, to be quite frank with you guys. Picking the music and then licensing the music, which is really, really tough, no matter what level of film or TV show or anything else you're trying to make, is always the most time consuming part. Just getting the rights clearances and all that stuff
Yeah.
to use the music took up a huge amount of time, but it's a labor of love. It's really what I love doing. And so we really sort of picked a classic kind of sort of overall sort of arching thing, but there's some contemporary things in there, and I think it's really relevant. Beyonce had not done her Western turn like she has recently done, which I think is obviously fantastic, and I think she's doing a lot for both the genre and the image, and the fact that she's embraced the cowboy hat and obviously has embraced it quite robustly in terms of it's been months now, and she's still showing up at the Olympics and all these events.
I mean, a
Still,
Houston girl. I'm surprised it took her so long to go
me
that.
too, a little bit. Yeah,
Well,
yeah. I'm
and
glad. I'm
also
glad
the
she
Yeah.
took the
also
turn.
the African American influence. People don't really understand the significance of the
Yeah,
cowboy crossed every
yeah.
ethnicity.
That's a big point of our film. Is that thank goodness that it's really the cowboy hat in the last few years, especially in the last few the better part of the last decade, has really taken on this tone of like all American inclusiveness. It's a part of everybody's cultural identity. It can be used in any form. We see Pharrell take it. He borrowed it from a variation that an English designer, fashion designer, had sort of developed and evolved, and he sort of grabbed that and used it. Now we see Beyonce utilizing. But yeah, it's all inclusive, and that's kind of one of the big points that we make sort of the tail end of the picture about how much inclusiveness and participation, that this is an all American symbol now, and it's really appropriate for anybody to utilize and
Even Canadians.
even
Hey, come on,
Canadians.
come on. We got Calgary's got the biggest stampede, I think, in North America.
Yeah,
Come
I was going to
on.
say the Canadians might be carrying the torch for this Western thing as strong as anybody
You're
in North
sending me
America.
to Canada. Is that what you're saying? That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Oh, maybe a culture exchange. Maybe we can get you to Calgary to the Stampede, or we can get you introduced to Corb Lund and some of the more great. Corb is a great current contemporary kind of cowboy musician, carrying on the kind of Western ideals.
I'm
Sounds like
down.
It's,
there's quite a few.
the notion of just music, and maybe we can wrap this up, but when you go from Gene Autry to Lil Nas X, it's just wild. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
Wild West,
he
modern day.
he brought the cowboy hat back. It was like, you got to be kidding me.
all inclusive.
There was this one scene where they brought him into this elementary school, all the kids knew the lyrics to that song, and nobody really knew exactly what he was singing.
That's the beauty, right?
But it's
Yeah.
the unity of it's all inclusive, like you were saying, John.
Yeah, yeah. To me, and that's sort of the power of, we talked about it. Hollywood is really the thing, and entertainment, whatever version of Hollywood that's current, is always going to come back to the symbol somehow, some way, some form, and sort of keep it all going. That's what
It is.
has made it an iconic.
It is
symbol.
so baked into the culture. When Marlboro decided to have someone who's going to represent their cigarette,
Yeah.
it was clearly going to be a cowboy. And I guess I have maybe a couple other questions I might have. One is that, if you could wrap up what you believe the cowboy hat represents, take us down that with all of your experience with your own hats, with this movie, with the culture. What does it represent to you?
Well, I think it obviously represents, one thing that it sort of inarguably represents is America. It's very unique to North America, and that does. Sorry, Michelle, it does include Canada.
Don't be sorry to me. I know I see the same people in my future, so I'm flipping down.
And if you say you're sorry, you get to be Canadian.
Yeah, so it's really an singular American icon, and probably one of the most readily identifying, iconic symbols visually worldwide of America. But what's incredible about the cowboy hat is it's so diverse, because the black hat can represent the bad guy, right? But the white hat can represent the good guy. So it's amazing as how one thing can be two sides of a coin, and that's what's really amazing. And that's just the nature of hats, right? The hats are sort of a flashing billboard as to what you're trying to say at any given moment. You're the good guy, you're the bad guy. Are you a paper boy in New York City in the 1930s? Are you a Texas Rangers fan but wearing your baseball
or
hat?
even how you wear the hat? You tip it back, you tip it forward. If it's a baseball cap, you're going this way.
I mean, no, it's backwards. I have. I love a good backwards baseball cap. Okay?
Yeah.
We derailed, but
so to me, it's probably one of the only things that is singular in terms of it represents America and this idea of America and the hardiness of the American ideal through the lens of the cowboy is kind of the singular. But to me, it's fascinating in terms of how it has so many facets that can represent so many individual things, just by the shape of your brim, the height of your crown. I mean, look at this. I'm going to transform really quick.
Very nice.
Very
nice.
I'm going to transform and I will turn into a different person. This is what's amazing about these things, right? So hopefully you can see everything. Now, that's a different guy.
That is definitely a different guy.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So you can see we both have all these.
All right, here we go.
Are we about to?
Here we go.
I know.
Everybody can transform. Yeah.
Right.
This is definitely a different guy.
Yeah.
You got one more. You got one more, because I got one more.
Oh, I've got three more. I got two more, and then here's.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, here's a good guy.
There you go.
I love that.
There you go.
If you naturally, before you even said good guy, I was like, I love that.
And that is. Can you see it? That's a real hot feather. I found that one on one of my walks down a country road.
Yeah, I've got. This is kind of my hunting hat.
Now I got to get. Now I got to get another one.
I mean, if we want to do fedoras,
yeah, that's a porcupine quill, and that's a boar's tooth. So,
nice.
That's what's great about these things, right?
I love it.
They all just transform you into somebody completely different. Rich Rand taught me that. He goes, "You put on a hat, and you just become a different person."
Well, and when
Oh, this one I like, Jeff. This is a different person. I
yeah,
feel like there should be a like a moonshine jug with like an XXX on
I,
it right here.
I would say I feel left out, but I'm really enjoying watching the view. It's fascinating.
well, and when
Yeah,
I
but
love
that's
it.
and when Michelle and I developed or stumbled into this idea, the fedora, the newsboy, the bucket, it's just and I walk into this hipster bar out here in the desert, and oh my goodness, that hipster phenomenon. It's so interesting. To your point, it is yeah. Well, if you want to keep going, I can keep
you
going.
just we don't have to keep going, but it's pretty amazing how it just it just transform you as a person, in
I
terms of your
got
I
identity.
mean, which
I got Indiana Jones here. Yeah.
You need the bullwhip
I do like a
and
good fedora.
Oh, very
yeah,
nice. Very
yeah,
way to get in the
yeah.
game there. Thank you. I was wondering when you were going to get in the
I
game.
know.
Yeah, I like all these different looks. You guys are flying the flag, and the cowboy hat is just one of many aspects of this thing. But to me, it's still the most impactful, most iconic of all the hats.
And here's
Love the inclusiveness.
other than thanking you profusely for being a part of our show, there's one more question. We sort of come to understand that a part of the show is to inspire. And if somebody
Hmm.
was a young documentary filmmaker and they wanted to set out to make a movie that they had a passion for, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, just do it. I mean, it now, especially on the documentary side. It's obviously to make a narrative film with actors and musical scores and special effects and things like that are both costly and time consuming and things like that. But to tell a story doesn't really require a lot of resources, given what you can obviously, you could film a documentary on your iPhone. You could film a documentary with a DSLR camera. You can tell a story, and that's really, the thing that led me into the Cowboy Hat doc was that sort of ability just to really capture a story so easily these days. I started in the days when we had to shoot on film, and that's a hard pursuit for an individual to do, to actually expose chemical, emulsion based film. But now in the digital age, there's a lot of different ways to sort of capture a story and tell a story and create, graphics, things like that. So quite honestly, Jeff, the simplest thing is, if you've got a story you want to tell, just do it. The only way you get better as a storyteller is to keep taking swings and try to tell your story and learn lessons along the way. So yeah, it's the best time, I think, in the history of the medium of motion pictures. Between YouTube, in terms of self distribution, you can get your story out there, or if you do a good enough job, then somebody's going to pay you to do it and commission a story. So yeah, just get out there and do it. Find something you're passionate about and figure out a way to go from beginning to middle to end, and just do it.
Yeah, I think what the key that you said is passion, and not to, technology exists, and yes, it is accessible, and but it is it is in the story that people get
Yeah, it's just a tool. Yeah,
that get brought
yeah,
in. So the writer with a story that you wrote, while you were
yeah.
going along, documentary filmmaking is amorphous. It moves because you don't really know how it's going to end. Feature film, you're shooting a script, pretty sure you know how it's going to end.
Right.
Documentary filmmaking doesn't
Yeah,
work that way, and so once you had,
yeah,
I don't know what your ratio was, 10 to 1, 20, you had a lot of footage to work with to
yeah. Keep
then
going up.
to
Yeah,
then
yeah,
tell a
yeah.
story, and tell a story in what was 90 or 100 minutes. I don't remember exactly how long it was, and you did it brilliantly, John. And
Right.
we thank you so
Well, thank
much
you.
for being a part of this. um,
Yes, sir.
and we're
Well, thanks for
champions.
letting me be a
Yeah,
part of your story. Yeah,
we're
it's
champions
exciting what you guys
of
are
your
doing.
film, and it just meant so much for us to have somebody of your caliber to come on and share your story. So, Michelle, would you like to bring it home here? What would you like to say to John?
I mean, John, and I tip my hat to you. I thoroughly enjoyed watching your movie, and the Cowboy Hat movie is something that is, uh, I believe, going to continue on multi generations. My daughter just started her sophomore year in high school. Is very artistic, way more than her mama, and does enjoy editing. And I could see her potentially going in that way, but she's very creatively driven. And knowing that I grew up in Texas as well, she's interested in history and stuff, and so I think that it's something that will continue to go on. So it was a real pleasure. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. Well, thank you guys for helping promote it. I mean, the Cowboy Hat movie was multiple years, took several years to get it done, and it was a labor of love. And thanks to you guys for getting the word out there about it, and
Yes, sir.
hopefully people continue to experience it and discover it.
All right,
Thanks so much, Sean.
one more
Yeah,
tip of the
thank you guys
hat.
for having me.
We got to tip our
Tip of the
way out
hat,
here.
y'all.
All right. It doesn't have to be Cowboy Hat. It could be either one.
Thank you.
Yeah, which one do you want?
Thank you so much.
I mean, hang on. Jeff.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Hang on.
are we gonna keep going? You know.
I'm trying to find my biggest one here.
No, we're just gonna tip.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. All
Yeah.
right. Well,
You go small, Jeff. I'll go
I think that
big.
might be my hat. Oh, I love that one too. My favorite's the gray, but it's hard to pick.